to the May 11th edition of PFF Forecast. Eric's still here, and I'm doing the cold open here because we are joined in the stead of George Shahuri by senior data scientist at PFF, Ben Brown. George is off in a different country visiting his girlfriend, who he hasn't seen in a while. And so as we can all relate to that, we welcome Ben. Ben, how's it going?
It's going well. I know I got big shoes to fill with George, gallivanting around Europe, but I'm ready and prepared to make, my initial entry into the PFF forecast. I've been waiting for this day, so looking forward to it.
All right. And with that, let's rock. Well, look, that cold open, I got to say it extended a little bit into, George doesn't normally let me talk. I am probably, of the two of us, the more generous of the two. So that certainly was out there. We do miss George. We are happy for him, though, as he gets some time. I don't even think he's taking time off, to be quite honest with you.
Right.
He's a very disciplined guy, as everybody that knows and has listened to the show knows. He's far more disciplined than me in almost everything. But I will tell you, much like me, he struggles to take even a moment off of work. So I'm sure he's working while we are without him here. But look, what I really love here, let's just introduce the audience to you for a second. So you joined PFF 2016, part-time, a lot like me. You and I started writing a college football betting column in 2018. And then you took the plunge in 2020 during the coronavirus pandemic,
right,
and joined us full-time. You've since been moved to senior data scientist in our group. A long-time veteran. You've been betting a lot longer than me. You are my infamous betting partner that I talk about on this show. And you are a person who has won a significant amount of money in DFS, college DFS and things like that. So I'm delighted that you're on here as one of my best friends, but also a great colleague. And what I like the most here, Ben, is now that George isn't here, I can talk about some of the things I like that he finds nauseating. So this podcast, right, we're gonna hit a little bit of college football. We're gonna dabble. I know Stone Rochelle, who directs podcasts for PFF, doesn't want us talking about USFL. We're gonna talk a little bit about USFL, just a little bit, and then obviously go over some NFL stuff. Ben, right now it seems like it's not the sports abyss, but for us with football, it feels like it. But there's really a lot going on.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I was, listening to the forecast on Sunday, kind of sweating some of my own bets and things like that. I mean, we had, the Minnesota Wild, who we both originate from Minnesota, so you get some decent opportunities to bet on things with that. But I think if it was, my own, if this could podcast go in any one direction for me personally, I would probably talk, 45 to 50 minutes about the WNBA. I do think it has been a pretty exciting start to that season. But I think, USFL, we got college football futures, like you mentioned as well. The NFL schedule comes out tomorrow. And I do think that kind of dictates a little bit for how to approach teams, both in, the futures market and some of these, initial lines that we're going to get set on. So, it's been it's pretty exciting times, I would say, for, a sports bettor, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a lot of, there's been a lot going on here. And I think some of it, and again, like, we all have our secondary sports. I know George bets golf, he bets F1 and things like that. For me, the one that I think is really going to grow for us at PFF over the next few years, and obviously we've had PFF College Greenline since 2019. It is college football, and lucky for us, and I've made a lot of allusions to this sort of on the internet over the past few days. Our friend Anthony Tresh, our colleague Anthony Tresh, has done a great job sort of getting this up here for us, as far as like knowing who the quarterbacks are, knowing some of the realignment. Now, when I heard about the realignments early, last year, I was nervous because it felt like there was going to be a lot to do. Ultimately, there wasn't that much to do. But we ended up, sort of putting out our simulation. Ben tweeted out, sort of like the contenders, kind of like the middle contenders, where I think we would have had Georgia last year before they emerged as an 8-1 underdog to win the college football playoff. And then beneath that tranche, you have a bunch of a lot of shit's got to go right for this to work. For the PFF forecast, look, George isn't here. Let's say nice things about him while he's gone, please. Okay. But we want to hear from you on how to make this podcast better heading into next season. Should we be doing, look ahead lines, for the next week on the Wednesday of? Do we want to get that degenerate? Do we, do you want to eliminate me entirely? Yes or no? The link is in the description. There's a listener survey here. It takes less than 5 minutes. We like your feedback. We get it all the time. And we really do enjoy all of you that listen to the show. We really appreciate you. And we'd like to make the experience for you better. Ben, what is your first takeaway when you look at the college football sort of season, but also just the simulation and sort of what we have going for us over the next few months?
Yeah, definitely. I do think, my big initial takeaway is just how far ahead Georgia and Alabama look than everybody else. I know we probably say this every year about Alabama specifically, but they are significantly better in our ELO rankings than every other team outside of Georgia. I think they're 100 points better than Ohio State right now. So from that perspective, this really is a two-team race. I know it's, the college football playoff, we're going to have 4 teams in it, but right now there are probably 2 legitimate contenders. And then there's probably, 20 or so teams that have a ton of question marks that need to be answered in order to potentially compete with those top 2 teams. So I do think that the gap between those 2, I think, is probably the most drastic that we've seen in quite some time, given, some of our modeling and things like that. But it's going to be interesting. I do think there's a lot of ways to potentially take advantage of it from a sports betting perspective. We have gotten a number of markets already offered, I would say probably earlier than we have in years past, with WinBet, dropping their win totals. I think FanDuel has not only division futures, but intra-division futures as well available. So there's, a number of spots that we are at least a little bit off market in comparison to the betting market. I do think that's, spots where we can definitely take advantage of.
Yeah, and I, every once in a while, when I do this exercise, I think that the biggest difficulty is not the win totals. If you can sort of, we talked about this, I talked about this with George, I talked about this with you and Kendall on the PFF betting podcast. The hard part isn't so much, coming up with the right power ranking. You can rig the system to sort of use past information, returning starters, returning snaps, which, by the way, returning starters and returning snaps, I don't think is going to have the signal that it used to have.
Yeah.
Because the lack of returning snaps now is not necessarily due to players graduating and moving on. It's due to transfer portal stuff. Because if you look at a team like USC, returning snaps is not going to be a signal as to how good USC is, right? Because they got Caleb Williams, they got other players. They have Lincoln Riley, and that's where one team, for example, I think we're too low on. But you could do all that and come up with a power rating. The hard part is coming up with what you think the committee is going to do, because we only have back to 2014. So now that's 8 seasons, and one of them was a pandemic season. So you really don't know. We bowed out of simulating the college football season in 2020 because of the pandemic and the lack of sort of uniformity there. But, it's really trying to configure sort of what would happen in certain circumstances. Take last year, Alabama was really one drive away against Auburn away from not even being anywhere close to making the playoffs. What if they go into Atlanta as a 2-loss team and beats Georgia soundly the way that they did in the SEC title game? Do they make the college football playoff? Because my guess would have been yes, but then we have to tear up the entire fake voting system we put into the simulation, right? And so that to me, that's where I do compare our results to the market and see okay, where are we falling? Like, what teams are we underestimating? What teams are we overestimating? Where is it, to me, in my opinion, acceptable to be doing this? And that's where we are now. Like, I think the market, is painting, Alabama at 2-1, basically across everywhere. Georgia is either second or third favorite, depending upon which book you look at. On DraftKings, they're 3-1. I know on Bet Online, there's some more like 9-2. Ohio State 5-1. And then after that, it's Clemson 12-1, USC 25-1. 25-1, I mean, for folks, that's 1 divided by 26. If you want to follow along at home, that's about a 4% chance. So does that seem high? I think that seems high. But it's also not like, it's also not saying the team's a 10-1, team as well. Yeah. So it's really tricky. But I do think we have the top teams, right? I mean, we have Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State as the 3 top ones. We're a little lower on Ohio State than the market.
A little bit. And I do agree with you. I know you kind of tweeted this out as well, but USC is another one. And I'm glad you touched on this a little bit, because I would say, first starting out kind of building both the NFL and college football models, some of the things we probably incorporated. I think a lot of people just assume there's kind of this like seamless transition between NFL modeling and college football modeling and all these other things. So a lot of like the continuity aspects of is the head coach still in place? Is the offensive coordinator still in place? Is the defensive coordinator, quarterback, those sorts of things? Like, a lot of that is not necessarily getting completely thrown out the window at the college football level, but it's definitely seems to be at least a more difficult problem to model or solve, given the situations that have been changing so quickly with coaching and with transfer portals and everything else, completely changing the makeup of a team from one year to the next. So I do agree with you that, modeling or building some of these power rankings out, especially early on in this process, has definitely evolved. And I do think that's kind of how you have to stay ahead of the curve. But I think USC is a team that is kind of off market at different books, right? Like if you're looking at DraftKings, they're 25-1. I saw them at 40-1 on Caesars here earlier today as well. So there is some decent pricing discrepancies even on these college football championship odds. And I do think that it kind of speaks to the difficulty of judging, teams 3 through 15 right now and how good those teams actually are.
Yeah, 40-1, 1 divided by 41. If you want to look at the not implied, but actually just like the break even, that's 2.4%. So you're just looking from book to book. You have a 1.5% difference in the odds. You're not going to see that at the top, but you might see it with Georgia, actually, if you look at the difference Bet Online and, for example, DraftKings. But, they're not huge differences, but, if you do end up hitting on a long shot like that, obviously you want to have 40-1 in your pocket, then you want to have 25-1. So that, of course, is a reason to shop around. But I do think, for me, I do think that there's still value in doing this exercise right now, even though we don't know who half the we know who half the quarterbacks are. We don't know who half the starters are going to be in all likelihood.
Right.
It was like 3 consecutive years that this time of year, Tate Martell was a starter for some team, and he never starting for any team. So here's a few ones that I kind of want to look at and see what you think. So just at the top, Georgia, under 11.5, and this was a good bet, by the way, that you and I made last year. But it was disappointing in that it takes forever for these things to pay out. But we bet under 11.5 wins for Clemson, which ended up being, I think it was like minus 130, minus 135. I bet that like right before opening night, because I figured, look, they could lose to Georgia. We didn't know Georgia was a huge house at that time.
Right.
And then they did lose to Georgia, but of course, part of the issue with futures, you got to wait, months to get your money. But I do think, like, you look at some of these markets, and at least they're starting, in my opinion, to price more heavily the likelihood that these teams are at least going to drop one game.
Right.
Especially given the college football committee over the last couple of years has been relatively liberal with who they've allowed in. Multiple teams. So, you look at 2 years ago, you had Clemson and Notre Dame from the ACC. That was the year that they played in the ACC. Clemson had a loss, Notre Dame didn't, right? And then Clemson sort of answered the first loss with the win in the ACC title game. Last year, of course, you had the two teams from the SEC. I don't think you're ever going to have two Big Ten teams in there, but for the SEC, ACC, depending upon, I think, sort of the structure of the year, they're allowing for a loss or two. And you look at both of these teams, so Georgia and Alabama on win bets, over 11.5 for both these teams, plus 200. So you're basically taking 2-1 that either team will have a perfect season in the regular season, and then under 11.5 is minus 250. Now, 50 cents, that's a pretty big, especially when you factor in, that the fact that your money is going to be here from May until basically late November. But what do you think of those two numbers?
Yeah, I don't think it could touch the Georgia one, given, I think the only side for their particular bet is on the under. So I don't really want to lay minus 250. But the over for Alabama, I think we had them right around like 11.2 wins based on all of our simulations. So getting a plus 200 price on them to go over and get that 12th win, I think is maybe just a little bit intriguing, maybe worth a little bit of action here. I think that would be probably the only spot that I'd really pick out as far as not necessarily even needing to bet right now, but if I had to choose, that would probably be the spot that I would gravitate toward, because I do think they are clearly better than Georgia right now, given what we know about both teams. And I do think that they have, the offense in place to basically run the table. And I do think that if you agree that there's this pretty drastic separation between those two teams and everybody else, especially in the SEC, I think them finishing with a perfect record during the regular season could be a spot that actually pays off and, doubles your money in that scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. And, if you're getting 2-1, that bet's a loser if they lose in the first 5 or 6 weeks. But obviously, as they sort of get into the later part of the season, and let's say, again, this is a little bit of strategy. You do have to go game by game here. You do have to look at your simulations. I don't think that there's. If I look at this, we don't. I do think there is value to 2-1, right? Our mean projection for them is like
2.
Yeah, so they're I'd have to look at sort of at the actual, but yeah. So you take 2-1, right? And then let's say they get to week 7 and they're undefeated. That's perfectly viable. They also, I think, have one of those late season games against an FCS team that they always
they got Austin P basically November 19th. So I do think like the big spot for them, I think, is technically like week 2, week 3 with Texas on September 10th. Because I do think Texas is a team that the betting market probably likes a little bit more than what, our simulation likes right now, given what, we talked about previously with, the turnover at quarterback, who they're going to have starting, those sorts of things. But I think that's kind of the spot to circle if you're hesitant about this bet. But outside of that, I mean, they get Auburn at home, their last game of the season. There's, Georgia's obviously not on the regular season schedule right now. So if you don't really like, a team like Tennessee, a team like Texas A&M, which is kind of the way that we lean based on our simulation, I think it makes a lot of sense, I would say.
Yeah. So that's an interesting one. And again, so if they get by Texas, let's say, and again, if they don't, then you basically lost a 2-1 bet, right? Like that's fine. Or
it
whatever.
Happens.
But if you get, and they'll be more than, I would say against Texas, they'll be laying more than minus 200. So even if you don't feel like the greatest about that game, like you could always hedge either with the point spread, right? So the point I was trying to get to is later in the season, Alabama is going to be in games where the point spread is going to be 2 to 3 touchdowns, right? And so, and so if it gets to the middle of the season, and whether you by your statistics or by our statistics or by just the eye test or whatever, you don't like Alabama to go undefeated, you can probably take you could take their opponents with the points every single time, right? And even if Alabama squeaks out of those games, you end up winning money on the underdog. And if they were to lose outright, then of course you win the money with taking the underdog on the point spread. That's a way, again, if you like this bet, there are outs here for you. I think Georgia, as you said, it's going to be hard to replace. I mean, look, they had 5 first-round picks all on the defensive side of the ball. Their offense is okay. They have a couple of great tight ends. They lose George Pickens. They lose James Cook. Zamir White is great. I don't think they're going to be good enough to sort of be a run the table team. Speaking of people or a team that people think are going to run the table, Ohio State over 10.5 is actually the minus 250 in this one. Under 10.5 is 2-1. They're basically saying, look, like Ohio State has one loss on their schedule. I'm interested in this because Ohio State wasn't that good for a lot of times last year.
Right.
Like when you look at, and obviously they have like a fair amount of returning players. CJ Stroud, of course, is CJ Stroud is of course like coming back, and he's going to be great. I think though, they just weren't like, it's a team where it really does get difficult to sustain excellence week to week, where I'm not saying I'm gonna lay them, take 2-1 to go under here. But I'm not, like last year, I mean, you had one loss in the regular season. That was to Oregon. Oregon really did sort of beat them up a little bit. And throughout that, you also had, basically, Tulsa gave them a game for a little bit.
Right.
Penn State gave them a game for a little bit. Nebraska gave them a game for a little bit. Obviously, and then they got rolled by Michigan in in that game. So actually, they would have gone under this because that was actually not the Big Ten title game. Michigan played Iowa,
right?
Yeah, Big Ten West champion there. So again, like this is one where I'm not saying I would not lay minus 250 for them to go over 10.5.
Yeah, there's no way, basically, right? They do open with basically Notre Dame at home. They also do get Michigan at home to kind of end their regular season. But I agree with you. I do think CJ Stroud, obviously really good, quarterback prospect. Maybe he's going to have to elevate, the wide receiver room just a little bit. They do still have, Jackson Smith, to fill the void with Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson both leaving. But I still think there might be, a little bit of, speed bumps early on, especially in that Notre Dame matchup to start the season. They obviously have a couple cupcake games after that. But I think there's definitely maybe a loss to be found on their particular schedule. So I'm with you. I don't really think there's any play but going under for them as well. It's probably a spot I'm going to avoid and maybe just, probably fade them on some gain lines if I'm not overly excited about, news that is coming out for them as the kind of break camp. But I think for now, if I was forced to take a side, it would definitely be on under for Ohio State as well.
Yeah, Michigan 9.5 under is minus 140. That's one again. Cade McNamara. We'll see how much he can grow and evolve. Quarterbacks for the Wolverines have not really. I mean, you've had the Shea Pattersons, you've had folks like that really haven't evolved into the players that necessarily you need to be consistent contenders. Now, of course, they were the 2 seed in the college football playoffs, so they certainly got far last year. But it is telling that their win total is 9.5 and juiced under there. No Aiden Hutchinson, no Dax Hill, a few others gone as well. The one that we like a lot, though, Ben, talk to me about this one. Tennessee under 8.5. Fifth most difficult schedule in college football this year. Tough conference. What do you think about this bet? I think this is the one we want to put our stamp of approval on.
Yeah, we had to put our stamp of approval on this one, right? I mean, Hendon Hooker just hasn't been a guy that we've been overly excited about, hasn't really graded exceptionally well at the quarterback position, PFF's grading system. They also have Joe Milton behind him, but I think it's going to be Hooker to start this season. But this is like 2 games over what our simulation has. Like you said, 5th most difficult schedule, playing in the SEC East, have a number of really difficult opponents. I don't really think, they're one kind of star skill position player, Velus Jones, who's been, much maligned as the draft pick for the Chicago Bears. That was kind of their one real source of offense last year. So I'm interested to see how they kind of perform at the wide receiver position. But I think that overall, the market has probably been higher on Tennessee than what they should have been in the past couple of years. And I do think that in 2022, especially, they're a spot to definitely fade, because I don't think that Hendon Hooker is probably going to be able to elevate the talent of those around him to the point where they're going to be able to get, 9 wins, which is a pretty drastic off-market spot from our current simulation. So I think this one probably my favorite college football bet right now, and definitely a spot that I'm locking in for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So a couple ones that we also like here that are per our simulation. Minnesota to win the Big Ten West at 9-1. What was the number that we got Iowa at? Was that that was 10-1, right? 12-1?
Yep. We also had we did have Michigan last year to win the Big Ten title game on some random like Caesars boost that I bet early on in the season that I kind of forgot about until the week of or something. So that was the Big Ten was actually a really profitable spot for us last year. I do think Minnesota in the Big Ten West this year, it's like, I know you know about this all the time, but Nebraska is just like perennially overrated from the betting market. So they have the second shortest odds to win the Big Ten West, and it's Wisconsin at the top, Nebraska again at 2, Purdue at 3, Iowa 4, and then Minnesota at 5. We're pretty significantly off market on this particular spot as well. Maybe there's something that we're missing, but I think with Tanner Morgan at the helm, they got Ottman Bell still. They have it's time for PJ Fleck to roll the boat once more, and I do think that they're finally going to potentially get to that Big Ten title game. So 9-1 shot. I like this quite a bit. I think is there any reason that you don't like it, or is there anything that I might be missing from your perspective?
No, I mean they always run the ball well. I think they play great defense. I was actually at their facility a couple months ago because I gave a talk to the math department at University of Minnesota about football analytics, and it was really impressive. I think that what they're doing with data is I don't necessarily know what everybody's doing with data. We're up to 111 college FBS clients. They use our data in a different amount of ways, but theirs was certainly impressive. You look at Boye Mafe. They've had some draft Falele guys like that who have gone pretty high in the draft recently. They're certainly producing talent. Here's one, and I guess like the cat could be out of the bag here. This might be baked into our numbers. I was always like vocally anti-Oregon last year. Utah to win the Pac-12 at 5-1 seems reasonable. Rising's a good quarterback. They just have Tavion Thomas. I still think is there. I could be wrong, but they were really good last year, and they were really. And Utah's that kind of team where us numbers guys, we get sort of a reputation for not liking these kind of teams, but the team where they just kind of kick your ass,
right?
Yeah, and they just
on the ball.
Yeah, and I think it was a disappointing loss to Ohio State in the bowl game. They had a lead there. They did cover, but they did not win. But they also showed in that game that they can sort of go and score with a team like Ohio State. In that Pac-12, I think they're just tougher than everybody else, but they also can sort of flank people as well, which is not necessarily a characteristic of Utah that we're used to. So that's another one that I really like.
Yeah, Tavion Thomas is in the fold for Utah this year. So yeah, I mean they have pretty good, quarterback, running back, returning, decent offensive line as well. So I'm with you. My only hesitation with this particular spot is our evaluation of USC, right? And I think you said it already. I kind of mentioned it previously, but they're a spot where we are maybe just a little bit lower than the market. If we are wrong on that, they're going to be the team in the Pac-12 that ends up winning it, I would say. So it feels like maybe it's setting up something like the Los Angeles Rams in the NFL season last year, where we maybe just missed on a little bit. That could be USC in 2022, but if it's not, I do think Utah makes a ton of sense to win the Pac-12.
Yeah. All right. This podcast sponsored by Sunday. Does your lawn have weeds, bare patches, or pet spot? I think I'm 3 for 3 on this, by the way. I caved, I got pets. I caved, I got a house. So you're going to be dealing with all this. Sunday can help you solve all these problems and more. The easy way. They got everything you need from fertilizer to seeds to weed control, and it's all delivered right to your door. By the way, I think, the delivery person should be more gregarious about it. I think the biggest thing about lawn care is not the health of the grass. It's the esteem that you gain from having a great lawn. So make sure that everybody knows that you're getting delivered Sunday here. Sunday can help you grow a beautiful lawn without the guesswork or the nasty chemicals. Their custom plans include fertilizer and everything you need to easily care for your lawn. You can feel good with kids and pets being around. Just attach the ready-to-use pouch to a garden hose and spray. Takes less than 15 minutes. So it's even like the length of a USFL halftime show there to take care of your lawn. And Sunday is offering our listeners 20% off. Full season plans start at $129. You get 20% off at checkdown when you visit getsunday.com/forecast. That's 20% off your custom plan at getsunday.com/forecast. Awesome. Okay, so let's move on to a little bit of NFL talk before we finish with some best bets for the week on the USFL and maybe even a little bit of a sprinkle on the WNBA. There have been some values we've gotten this offseason. The biggest one I'll say is we got, and this is important as, folks listen to our show, try to get better at betting. I know, not everybody listens to the show to bet, but this does have, just being able to follow the markets. I think analytics, gets in the simplest terms, analytics can help us better understand expectations for every team, and that's where and we're getting a decent amount of flack for telling Jets fans that their draft was not an A+. They're feeling themselves right now, and maybe they should be. They did draft some pretty good players in the top 10. You can debate, their second 2 top picks, but to face facts, I mean, their win total's 5.5. They're 18-1 to win their own division. It's going to be a while, in all likelihood, before they're good again. But I think it's good to see how expectations have changed. The one that has changed the most, Chargers were basically plus 425 to win the division. The AFC West, they are now and behind Denver. And I think there was a realistic reason why they were behind Denver. They were behind Denver in large part because Denver had an easier schedule. And I think people talked themselves out of almost all of Russell Wilson's warts. I think now that they're basically plus 250 and on par with Denver, it is for a couple reasons. I think they're not as good defensively as Denver is.
Right.
But Kansas City, the team that sort of gives them the bugaboo every year, is not as good offensively. Right. So in that sort of 1-to-1 matchup, they probably could do better. Whereas I think Denver has always given the Chiefs fits on defense. It's always been that sort of you think about the 2 matchups last year, it was 23-9. It was one of the best unders in the history of the world. That Sunday night game, George and I had as the lock of the week. And then you had that Saturday game to end the year, week 18, where they needed a Nick Bolton fumble return and some luck, I think, to beat Drew Lock and the Broncos. They've always kind of had the defense and the squirreliness to mess around with the Chiefs, even though they haven't beaten them since 2015. Whereas the Chargers sort of on a very the Chargers are sort of a weaker version of the Chiefs. And I think as the Chiefs got weaker, I think people looked at the Chargers and said, okay, maybe they're more on par, and they scooted those odds up as the Chiefs traded Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, I do think, and I also think there's this assumption that Brandon Staley's basically going to be able to overhaul this defense in the second year. That's kind of his, was his MO coming up as the defensive coordinator. They obviously got the splashy free agent signing with JC Jackson. So I do think that's kind of, projecting out with the betting market and expectation that the defensively they should be a lot better. And like you said, Kansas City probably isn't going to be as much of a top unit as they were in prior years. Maybe Tyreek Hill matters a little bit more. Maybe it's not as seamless, filling in, a bunch of guys to handle a lot of those targets in the absence of, Tyreek Hill. But I think, at plus 250, I'm definitely not betting it because, we probably got a little bit of an off market number with Caesars, them being late to move down on the Los Angeles Chargers after they're kind of, what most would consider a pretty big hit from a free agent class. So I think that they still make a lot of sense to win the AFC West. But I don't know if you had to bet a team to win the AFC West right now, given the current odds, who would you be on? I guess is the real question.
Yeah, and just to be upfront, I have a plus 400 ticket on the Chargers. I'm not going to buy back into that. I would take Kansas City at plus 160, 170 right now. I think we more make it around 45% or so. So I would take the Chiefs if I take any. I'm actually not going. This is the second year I'm not betting Kansas City futures because, to me, I think it's especially the hard part is right now with the Chiefs, like all the benefits that they have, I think are long term. Like I wouldn't bet them over 10.5. I wouldn't bet them to make the playoffs. Obviously, I think that's like minus 250 or something. I wouldn't bet them to win the AFC West. If I bet anything now, it'd be like to win the AFC or to win the Super Bowl. And even then, I think that those aren't values right now. I think that the Chiefs are in a combination of being overvalued right now and are, but they're. I think the market has correctly pegged that they're not as strong as they used to be, but I still think they're overvalued, especially the way that I see them, which is I think that they're a classic candidate this year to sort of make the playoffs as a 5 seed that no one is thinking about and make a run.
Then get hot. Yeah. I mean, that's got to be the hope, right? Because I do think, even last year with Tyreek Hill, like Patrick Mahomes just didn't look, I would say, anywhere close to as dominant every single play like he has in previous seasons, right? And I think that is probably what's creeping in, that sort of recency bias for how well he actually played, especially in the mid part of last season. I do think that's creeping into a lot of people's mentality. So I would say I might be a little bit opposite. I do think that I think they might be almost not necessarily undervalued, but I think they might be getting to the point where they could almost be a buying spot, but it's tough to back, I guess, their futures when you are betting them almost every week, which is probably what's going to happen again this year. So we'll see. But
look, if they come out and look, I love the team. It's my favorite team. If they come out and they start apparently with Houston at home and then Houston in Houston and then home to the Chargers on Thursday Night Football. They get a mini bye and then there's a chance they're going to go to Indianapolis, a game I kind of want to go to because it's only a couple hours away. I mean, you squint there, and that could be a 3-0 start, and then you're already wrong, right? But they still have the toughest schedule in the league. Like they have every game that they have is on average a point harder than the average schedule of games is for an average team. So you're almost never going to be right. And in my opinion, like, let's say they go 10-7. Let's say they go, they make the 5 or 6 seed in the AFC. You're going to get better than their current number at 9.5, 18, 19-2 or whatever it is. Right. So you're not going to. I just don't think that they're a bettable team. Like I just think the market is so hot on them, even if they've cooled down to the point where they're just not a team I want to touch. But they are, in my opinion, maybe a little underrated in the AFC West specifically, but not enough to make a bet. The other ones that we have, and again, this will tell you what you need to know. We took the Bucks at plus 120 to win the NFC South. That was right before, that was with the grumblings of Brady. We took the Packers at minus 160 to win the NFC North. That was, kind of when there was uncertainty about Rodgers. The big one that I took today, this week, plus 407. I took Detroit to make the NFC playoffs.
There we go.
And then I took a no on the Raiders to make the playoffs. It was minus 250. I'll lay minus 250. I'll pay to see the Raiders make the playoffs this year, to be quite honest with you. But the Detroit one's interesting, right? When you look at their schedule, in the NFL now you get 3 sort of games that are reflective of how you finished the year before. And they're last place teams, and this year I believe it's Seattle, Carolina, and Jacksonville. In your own division, you have the Vikings, who could go either way. Right. They traditionally really haunted the Lions, but last year the Lions beat them and covered in both games. You have Chicago, who I think are going to be horrid, and you had a Green Bay team that is pretty good, obviously. 13 wins consecutive, 3 consecutive years. But there's a lot of changes going on there. Right. So, Dan Campbell got that team to play hard last year. I really think that he'll continue to do so. Jared Goff is a good quarterback, not a great quarterback. Maybe even he's a middle of the pack quarterback. But you look at that offense, you have a first-round pick at left tackle, a first-round pick at right tackle, a first-round pick at center, a first-round pick at tight end, a first-round pick at wide receiver, free agency guy in Chark, Armon St. Brown, DeAndre Swift. Like that offense is going to have to try pretty hard to be bad against this schedule.
Right. I would agree. And not only like the three games that you mentioned, but they also face the NFC East and the AFC East. So they get, like the Washington Commanders, New York Giants, those sorts of teams as well. So I think if they beat Chicago twice, if they can beat Chicago twice and potentially even go, 1-3 against the Packers and Vikings, given their schedule, they could still be in the thick of things in the NFC, in the NFC playoff race, I would say, because I do think there's just a ton of bad teams. So I like that one quite a bit. I think it almost reminds me probably of my worst bet all season. I did bet really early on the Bears to win the NFC North at plus 650. Obviously, they've gone in the complete opposite direction since then, but I do think the Lions make a ton of sense as almost that emerging filler team that could surprise a lot of people in the NFC North, especially if that division's down, given their strength of schedule and everything else. I think that is my favorite bet probably as well that you mentioned. So I definitely might be adding to our tally on that one a little bit after this. So
the thing is like, again, you look at the NFC, who's making the playoffs in the NFC?
Right.
Yeah, like Minnesota, and again, like, you and I both grew up rooting for the Vikings, and like, we've seen this song and dance a million times. They replaced Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman with Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, but like, it's not clear that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is better than Rick Spielman. In fact, he made a lot of, like, Minnesota drafted the most players and had the most trades during the 5 years preceding Rick Spielman's firing. So it's not that Kwesi threw, I think, a lot of good trades last couple weeks, and it's not like he's doing anything that Spielman didn't, right? And so it's all about, whether or not they draft good players, which is mostly a roll of the dice at every single pick. And then they obviously opted into Kirk Cousins, and we know the limitations in that approach. He was 17th last year in wins above replacement for dollars spent. And so when you're average at the quarterback position relative to cost, you have to be a plus team everywhere else, including coaching. And last couple of years, Zimmer, I think, has, his defensive prowess fell off, but their defensive talent fell off a lot.
Right. I mean, it got old really quickly, right? And now you're dealing with like Harrison Smith in the back end and everything else. But yeah, I agree with you 100%.
I don't think it's a lock that Kevin O'Connell is going to be better. Like, Kevin O'Connell's been a play caller in the NFL before, and the results were not great. And Ed Donatell's been a defensive coordinator in the NFL, and it's not been as good as Mike Zimmer. So, like, and I know Zimmer fell off a little bit, but this talent level is not. I mean, they're basically. It's
not where it was in 18 or even 17 in some ways, right? Outside of the quarterback position, maybe. But other than that,
are they more talented than Detroit? Yeah, but are they? When you look at the win totals, are they 2.5 games more talented than Detroit? I don't think so.
Not. Probably
not. So that's those are the kind of gambles you want to be able to make. Then
I think, and like what you said, like, who is going to make the playoffs in the NFC? And I do think everyone's just defaulting to Minnesota, but that probably leaves a lot of opportunities for, like you said, Detroit. And also, I know you're not as maybe on board with them, and they have become probably more popular than what I would have even wanted to now. But the Eagles, I do think, makes a ton of sense to both make the playoffs and to win the NFC East. They've dropped both pretty considerably after the draft, given the AJ Brown situation, but there's still a team that I probably have, our most exposure to in the futures market right now, not adding to it whatsoever, but they're a team that I am curious to get your thoughts on as well.
Yeah, the Eagles are really well run. I mean, they're not perfect. I think it's interesting where people will try to tell you, when they defend the trade ups, they're like, well, the Eagles know when to trade up. It's like, well, did they know when to trade up with Andre Dillard? Because that one sure went really well. But they're not perfect, but they're a talented team. I mean, I think they're doing it exactly how we would do it broadly if we were in their situation. Like, you had a quarterback on a big deal who was not good enough. You moved on from him. You wrote off the cost. You actually got a lot in return for him because you decided earlier than, like, let's say the Colts did to get.
You made the right decision right away, right? Which is a pretty key fact.
Right. And Hurts, Hurts was the most valuable quarterback in the NFL last year. If you look at wins above replacement per dollar spent. Of course, we don't think he's the best quarterback in the league, but per dollar spent, you're getting as good a value there. So then you have so much more. You have house's money to spend on the rest of the roster. And last year, it wasn't a great roster. I mean, I bet under them because I thought that, Kevin Gannon wasn't necessarily a proven commodity, Nick Sirianni wasn't. And early on, that made sense. They had one of the, the least, what I would through KPIs and stuff, one of the least, what I would say is imaginative defenses out there. And then, and then on offense, they really had to change and go with Hurts' strengths. Now, the question then becomes, they get A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith's a year older. Do they try to test out Hurts? Do they try to say, look, we can win 10 games with you running the ball 13 times, but if you're going to be the quarterback for this team long term, you're going to have to be a drop back passer. If they do that, they might struggle more than we think. If they say, look, Jalen Hurts is a 4-year quarterback for this team, and then we're going to move on, then I think they'll have more success this year than they would if they essentially use this year as a trial period for him.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, well, you're basically saying their ceiling isn't anywhere close to what it would be if they just turned Hurts loose and found out what he was actually capable of, right? But their floor is substantially higher in that situation. Then it's basically what it comes down to, right?
Yeah, if you make Hurts if you do what you did with Hurts in the second half of the season, your floor is pretty high, especially given the talent around you. But your ceiling is really low because and the Ravens have shown us this, and they've shown us this with the best version of this quarterback in Lamar Jackson. But they showed us this as with if you don't develop the guy as a drop back passer, then you are limited because the truly great teams in the league have great drop back passers. In a weak NFC with where you're maybe the 6th best team, I don't know what I would do. In my opinion, I try to find out in other ways if Jalen Hurts is the quarterback than on the field type of stuff. And then I would make a decision. But they very clearly sold a first-round pick this year so that they could have ammo next year. So I'm on board with this idea that they know who Jalen Hurts is, and they're going to play a strategy to optimize him in the next 2 years and then move on later, in which case the over for the Eagles is probably a good play. And again, it's who's going to make the playoffs in this conference. I mean, there's basically a 50-50 chance Dallas is kind of who they were last year, which is the class of that division and an unquestioned playoff team. Rams are probably that, Tampa's probably that, and Green Bay's probably that. And then from there, the Niners, every single year the Niners either lose 10 games or they make the NFC Championship game. That's how it's been for a decade.
It's every other. And this is the other year, basically, right?
Yeah, and Arizona, and then Trey Lance is certainly the guy there who's going to have to answer all the questions. The Cardinals, I think, were the most fraudulent 11-win team we've seen in a long time last year. We'll see if they can emerge, but losing Hopkins for 6 weeks certainly doesn't help them. Seattle stinks, and you look at the NFC North, Minnesota, Detroit, and Chicago all stink. And the NFC East, Washington and New York Giants stink, and the NFC South is is worse than all three of the divisions we already talked about.
It's the worst division of football, right, outside of Tom Brady. So it is great. I mean, the thing is, people are legitimately talking themselves into betting Washington and the New York Giants to make the playoffs this year, which is just mind blowing in a lot of ways, right? So
I wonder if you bet either or. I wonder if you bet either or, could you get that to actually work?
That would require the Eagles, I would say, falling off and the Dallas being absolutely horrid, I would say, in some ways, but it could feasibly happen. I don't know. It is crazy because it's really hard to find 6 or 7 playoff teams in the NFC right now. So
yeah. So in that way, I think a team like Detroit, where I think they're being undervalued, basically, at plus 407, you're saying they don't have a greater than 20% chance to make the playoffs. I reject that notion soundly. Okay. All right. Right now, you can get 25% off any PFF subscription if you use the code forecast. Look, it's not necessarily heavy football time right now, but it's going to become heavy football time pretty soon here. And what can you get with a PFF subscription? All PFF's locked article content. So great work by people like Sam Monson, Kevin Cole, Timo Riske, Ben Brown, Trevor Sikkema, Austin Gale, everybody there that produces great football content. Anthony Tresh, if you love college football. Ben Lindsay, one of the better up-and-coming writers we have. All those people, you can get access to their content. Fantasy football rankings and projections coming soon. That's Ben, Nathan Yonke, one of the most accurate projectors we have in the industry, and data and grades from the entire 2021 season and upcoming 2022 season. Support the pod and use the promo code FORECAST for 25% off any sub. All right, so Stone, we talked for a solid 45 here about real football, college football, NFL football. Let's indulge just for a little bit while George is out of town here. Let's indulge a little bit in the United States Football League. I gotta say, man,
real football league.
Yeah, first week and week 4 last week, we were winners in that league. The middle 2 weeks were a bloodbath. For me, it was the most frustrating thing, and it was emblematic in a game that we actually won, which was the Sunday afternoon game, New Orleans versus the New Jersey Generals, the Houston Gamblers, sorry. Right. And a game where, early in the week, we laid 3.5 with the New Orleans Breakers. Kyle Sloter, best quarterback probably in the league. Game closed to 6.5. And I can tell you right, and money line, I laid -190. It closed at -280. And I tweeted this out. I said, look, today you're going to get to find out what laying -190 and seeing a game close -280 in a football game and still losing feels like. Because you don't get that in the NFL, right? You just don't get these huge line movements in the NFL because of how efficient the league is. Right. This league's 4 years old, right? So this entire season and I think we're doing a pretty good job handicapping it. We're almost always getting closing line value on our plays, especially totals. Almost every single total dives by the end of the week. Last week it was weird because they changed a rule in the middle of the week to allow for
even more time off the clock, basically, right? First and third quarter.
And third quarter, even on incompletion. So you saw every total go down by 2. And so, but in the New Orleans Breakers game, what we ended up getting was in a situation where Kyle Sloter had about 15 seconds left and no timeouts. Instead of lining up for a field goal on third down, they threw the ball in the end zone. It was caught for a touchdown. They covered not only the 3.5, but to spite me, they covered all the people who laid the 6.5 at the end and got the worst of it. The total landed 39. We had, I think, a bunch of under 42 and a bunch of over 38s. So that felt really good. But it was emblematic of a league where a lot of weird shit's happening.
Right.
And so as we enter week 5, by the way, week 5 is when the XFL, that's how far the XFL got a couple of years ago. So we're taking nothing for granted here.
Cash those over bets on it surviving longer than the XFL,
exactly. So here we have a few games. I just want to focus maybe on the one that I bet the most on here. This is the Houston Gamblers. So this is the Sunday afternoon game at 4 p.m. Eastern. The Houston Gamblers are laying 5.5. Total on this game is a healthy 34 points. I bet favorite. I bet under here pretty heavily. We have seen a little bit of movement towards Houston. We have not seen any movement on the total. We have most of the time the movements in these markets have been late week because the limits have gone up. But these have sort of stayed pat as where they opened on Monday. What do you think of this game? The Maulers and the Gamblers, the two worst offenses in the league by EPA.
Yeah.
But also, I think there's a gap between these two teams, even though they're both the two worst.
Yeah, it's a complete privilege to watch this game Sunday afternoon because it's going to be a complete bloodbath. But like you said, I think Pittsburgh overall just seems overmatched. No real semblance of offensive production. Worst unit in the USFL. They can't move the ball effectively. They did cover last week. Got that end of the first half drive for a touchdown. Really, their only touchdown last week. They get 2 field goals as well, but they just don't move the ball well enough to compete with any other team in the USFL, which is kind of sad to say. So I'm with you on Houston. Hasn't moved a ton in our direction, but I do think that they are definitely the correct side. Maybe laying that many points and going under still makes me a little bit nervous, but I do think that you probably hit on the correct side for both those.
Yeah, that one, so the Pittsburgh Maulers quarterback is one Kyle Lauletta. He was drafted in the first round, got beat out, but then has since gone in. Kirby Wilson, I mean, there isn't a part of being a head coach in football that he has mastered.
Yeah, it looks comfortable doing that's for sure. Yeah,
he's terrible at the clock. There was an instance, and again, this is where and Sam Schwartzstein, one of my good friends in the industry, ran the rules for the XFL. I thought was doing a great job. Anybody that's going to start a league, you need good coaching. Like, you can't
Right.
just have Todd Haley's of the world, because they were bad at, and Haley wasn't that bad, but like, they were just a failed version of the thing we're trying to change right now, which
Exactly.
is that coaches don't know how to handle the clock. They don't know how to handle fourth downs. There's been a lot of over 55-yard field goals kicked in this league when
And
kickers
none of
can't
them
make
have made.
25-yarders.
Right. Yeah.
And it's just like, you're giving up field position. And what I love about these leagues, and again, this is what George rolls his eyes at, because he's, George loves football, but not in the same way I do. The thing I love about this league is it's a throwback to the games that were played previously. The quarterbacks don't matter as much because they all suck, and the running backs matter more because you have to be able to run the ball, and every running back in the league is good, right? Not every left tackle in this league is good, but every running back in this league is good, and field position matters, right? When Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert are the two quarterbacks, field position doesn't matter, right? When your quarterbacks are Clayton Thorson and Kyle Lauletta, the field position matters, and if you're kicking 55-yard field goals, it's really a dumb decision. Okay.
Yeah. You hit on a really interesting, you hit on the good point. I couldn't agree more with all of it, to be honest with you, because it does make so much sense where the league is currently at and where it's probably headed. So
here's another one that I really like, and this is one where, again, to kind of get an eye into sort of how Ben and I bet. This one is on Saturday at 3 o'clock. The New Orleans Breakers against the New Jersey Generals. Total on the game is 36.5. The Generals are 3-point underdogs. Again, no home field advantage in this league, except for maybe the Birmingham Stallions, who that every game is played in Birmingham, usually no one goes to these games except for the Birmingham game. There's like 1,000 people that show up and they cheer for Birmingham, so there's a little bit of home field advantage. This game came out, the number was 2. It was Breakers -2, and we made the game 1. And I looked at, I sent you in a Slack chat. I said, look, I think we should bet this game, but let's wait till it gets to 3. The reason being is, the Breakers kind of did everything last week that bettors love. They outgained their opponent by a shit ton. They were efficient. Their defense was amazing. Like, the Houston Gamblers running back went from like a 150-yard game to like having 12 carries for 8 yards. New Orleans dominated Houston and barely won and barely covered. And usually there's value on backing that team the next week because everybody remembers the results. Now, betting markets are sharper than that, I think. New Jersey is actually the best offense in this league, and they do it by running the ball, interestingly. They do it by running the football. They have 2 quarterbacks, Luis Perez and DeAndre Johnson, that they rotate. And weirdly, like, they're both pretty good at what they do. But it's a slower type of game. So interestingly, I like New Jersey +3 here, even though I do like the Breakers long term. I like New Jersey in the futures market as well because they're the best team in the bad conference. The Breakers and the Stallions, the 2 best teams in the league, both play in another conference. Like basically New Jersey's on the way to be playing, Case Cookus and the Philadelphia Stars in the championship.
Exactly.
So they got
to get to there. So I do think they are a buy in the futures market. I do kind of agree with you. We basically have them both as the 2 best offenses according to PFF grading as a unit. So Breakers are actually first by just a little bit. Generals are second. I do think, like you said, Breakers and Generals both really good from a rushing perspective as well. I do think New Orleans has probably the best wide receiver. Did win us, that game like you mentioned last week, Jonathan Adams. I'm buying his jersey, so it does pain me to go against New Orleans this week. But I'm with you. I think +3 is just a little bit too much for the Generals. So I like it. So
So that one I would take. And honestly, so this is the tricky one. New Orleans and New Jersey both have good offenses in this league. Good offenses in this league, and as such, you see the total at 36.5. Every single New Orleans game has gone under the opening total, and I think last week you could make, I think it did close at 39.5. So technically, all their games have gone under. Even though Kyle Sloter has made throws that he's needed to make, they're a very very run-pass offense, which has, it has the fat tail that I don't like when I'm betting an over. Furthermore, the New Jersey Generals run the ball a lot. Like in the first game of the season, they ran the ball 24 consecutive plays. So even though both teams are good on offense, they're slow on offense. And it's sort of like that Phillip Rivers, Los Angeles Chargers 2018, where they're a good offense, but they play 20 fewer plays than the average team or whatever. And unders were such a send in that league in that time period. So I'll take under 36.5 in this game. in addition to +3, if you have a book that'll let you parlay those, I do think that there is
Tease
value.
them up. Yeah.
And I don't know if you tease a total, but in this league, obviously we don't have enough data to know you shouldn't tease totals in a normal football league. But the +3 under 36.5 is something that I don't mind at all. The other two games, they're kind of throwaways. The Friday night game, 8 p.m. Michigan Panthers, coached by Jeff Fisher. They're 2-point underdogs against Tampa Bay, coached by Todd Haley. That's if you want, bottom feeder head coaches from the 2012 season, for $100, Alex. That's that game.
Enjoy your Friday night in that one.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
The total is 33.5. Jordan Tiamu is the quarterback for the Bandits. Shea Patterson, I believe, if Paxton Lynch isn't healthy, will be the quarterback for the Michigan Panthers. I don't really want to touch this game at all. 33.5 is too low.
I can't stomach backing the Bandits after last Sunday's performance base or last Saturday night's performance base. So that was, I think if we didn't get the New Orleans Breakers through the back door last week, I probably would have quit betting USFL. But thankfully, we can continue because that was one of the more painful bets I've experienced quite some time.
Let's actually close on that because it does provide a story for what it's like to bet sports because. In my opinion, betting sports is about getting the best of it. And betting sports is also, and I was actually talking to one of my friends who works in the NFL a couple days ago. We were talking about, he wanted a reference for something, and we were chatting about sports betting because obviously somebody who works in the NFL can't bet sports. But I said, but you have to have the temperament of a sports bettor, right? Like there are weeks where you sort of, you have weeks where you sort of like you get the best of it, right? And things just don't work out, and that's kind of how the world works. So in this game, so it was the Birmingham Stallions versus Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay was 4-point underdogs at the apex. There were reports that Jamar Smith, who has been one of the best quarterbacks in the league, had COVID and wasn't going to play. Then there was the sort of report that he was released to play, but then they started his backup, who is not a very good quarterback. And so there were books that had stray +4s, and then there were books that had, most books were painting at -2.5.
2.5, yeah.
And so we had a big position on +4 in a ton of different books, and we sprinkled a bunch of -2.5s. Essentially, if the game landed 3, we would have made a lot of money. And it was 13-10 after a missed field goal by both teams. So we got lucky and then we got unlucky in a stretch of time. And instead of punting and pinning this team deep, the Tampa Bay Bandits, coached by Todd Haley, kicked a pretty long field goal to try to tie the game. And of course, it doesn't go in because it's a USFL kicker. If he was any good to be in the NFL, and it left just enough time for the Stallions to bleed a bunch of time, but not enough to bleed it all out, right? And so they get inside the 10, they get 3 plays.
It was like 2 minutes or just hit the 2-minute warning when they got inside the 10-yard line or something.
And Haley kind of messed up his timeout structure too. He let the first 40 seconds go off and then called 2 times. They had first down inside the 2-minute warning, and he let the 40 seconds go off after first down and then took timeouts on second and third down, which you should always let it go. You should always go timeout, and then make the other offense make a decision. And usually that decision will be running the ball because they want to take the 40 seconds off. But if they decide to throw, you get preserved, right? You get time preserved and all that kind of stuff. So it was a stupid decision. And, of course, Birmingham kicks a field goal, wins by 6, and we lose, probably 60% of our bets and win the other 40, which was a small loss, but it could have ended up being a huge win. And, I'm walking around, I'm just pissed off, but it's again, you got the best of it, right? You got a great amount of money on an outcome that in this league with such low totals was relatively, it
was live. It was live basically the whole game, right? Even 10-10 at halftime or whatever, it was setting up really well. If we could have gotten to I think you said 21-18, we would have hit both middles on the spread and
we had a middle
something
on the total,
like that.
We had a small loss. We paid the vig on the total, but so that's life of betting, and of course, you and I bet together, so it's sort of fun to do this on the show. George and I don't bet together, but we bet on a lot of the same things. So that's a dynamic that's inherent in the show as well. So this was fun, Ben. Hopefully we can do this again. I'm glad. Thank you to George for allowing us to do this without him. I think this is the first time that one of us. I think George hosted the show with Nora Princiati for half the show after I had to leave. But this is the first full show where we have one of us and not the other one of us. We're going to go ahead and we'll be back on Sunday with me and George. But Ben, thank you a lot for joining us.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, Forecast.
All right, and so we'll be back on Sunday. Stay classy, America.